presumably most of this committee does, and hopefully the government figure voting.
Coming up pretty quick though. On the other side of Litchfield Road. I drove over there about 3 or 4 months ago. They seem to be looking forward to be better measures there. They seem to be like either completely empty or looks like a reasonably full. So he's looking forward to your
When I was a kid, I went to the festival. It's on in the street. I didn't even cross my mind. He's hoping to get married. They have a book and they applied for it. They really like it. They like to have a presentation.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. You can just email Katie and the results of your
And it's a parent.
one of us whenever we go.
Yeah, you're here. This is. Now when you go to his active duty, they took it.
Go ahead. We're working that out.
And then she gets
Pretty good.
They bought a house out about 4 blocks from us.
I just was not able to. I wanted to. My school schedule just doesn't let me get the nights off sometimes.
But it was only, but it was in,
No, you're all right.
Okay, okay. You want to get stuck in that little crack area, right, between the 2 tables?
I like I have 2 tables rather than only access to the mobile.
7, 8 o'clock.
Is my understanding of the why we got access to I-7.
I guess it's over now. What side of the McDonald's are you on?
X-ray you know, I'm not, I think the I wouldn't be something that I would support.
Yeah, basically they have a fire truck that sits down there.
But drive to make it less.
That's about 4 hours. And 2 guys just sit in the trucks for like
It's just bad.
8 hours a
So
day.
little up there that
Yeah, I think they try to
has to be the first choice.
Yeah, I don't even think they have 24 coverage.
What I see is, like, I see.
But basically what happens is there's this
and
little
easy for them to get past.
mobile fire department thing that they just set up down in Mobile.
You can make it.
Yeah, I've had to several.
I've never been down there. Unless you take like 8
Free Wi-Fi probably, or.
We want to go so big, we want to go things that are I guess if I had I'm looking at it with the effect on the other people, other merchants up there trying to do a business. Subway is going to, have some business. I think so.
Like for breakfast and for lunch.
We haven't seen hundreds of
It's been proposed.
Now they want to do more.
It was approved at the plan commission.
Was it? Yeah. The big issue is the driving.
I call this meeting of the Goodyear 2025 General Plan Committee to order. And would everybody rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a few absences tonight. Estelle is having surgery tomorrow, and she's on medication tonight, preparing for that. Both Jessica and Brandon are out of town for their jobs. And
Next month.
that was next month, okay. Good. You don't need to be excused. And Pastor Ryan Nunez is absent again. I'm going to be talking to Ryan before the next meeting. I was unable to do so before this meeting, but he has a lot on his plate right now, and I'm hoping that he will agree to flop to an alternate and allow us to make Ted a permanent member, since Ted comes to all the meetings and is very active. So I'll give you an update on that next meeting. The people, that I mentioned that aren't here, I'd like to have a motion to excuse them. Somebody want to make a motion?
I move to.
Okay, in a second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, they are excused. Are there any comments on the minutes from the February 12th, 2013 meeting? Everybody had a chance to look at those? Do we have those, Katie? Did each one of us get a copy of those? People looking at
It's in the packet, page 3 and
page 3? Okay. If you can't
Other
find
than
it,
Brandon was mentioned that he was here twice in a row.
right.
He really wanted to.
I did.
Since we're expecting a full meeting, if there's no objections, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of February 12th, 2013 of the General Plan Committee?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The minutes are approved. This is an open call to the public to give an opportunity for the public to address the Goodyear 2025 General Plan Committee on an item not listed on today's agenda. Public comment is encouraged. There will be time tonight for the public to address the committee regarding the land use plan after the presentation and committee discussion. Please complete a speaker card listing the subject you'd like to discuss. Unless otherwise permitted by the chair, each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Before you begin to speak, identify yourself clearly, stating for the record your name and address. Katie, are there any speaker cards at this time?
I didn't receive any.
I would like to add to that, if someone needs to leave right away and you would like to address the committee sooner, I would make an allowance. But if you could wait till the end, the presentation may answer some questions or information that you're looking for. Okay, at this time, I'd like to have Katie Wilkin give us a presentation on the open house meetings. Now, before Katie does that, I'd just like to say I attended 3 of the 4 meetings. You probably don't even know there was 4 because one of them was in Mobile, and it's quite a drive. And Katie didn't even tell us about it because she knew it was a lot to ask for us to drive 2.5 hours there and back. So, but the 3 meetings that were local, we had very good turnouts, as Katie will tell you. I wish I could have seen more of you there because I think it was a good opportunity for us to talk to the residents that came because they had some good ideas. And I would have loved to see everybody at least one of those meetings, but unfortunately that didn't happen. However, I've tried to figure out how we could take advantage of other situations, and one in particular that came to mind is those of you that live in neighborhoods with alliances or HOAs, which is pretty much everybody. Maybe you could go to your next HOA meeting or your alliance meeting and ask your management company or the board president, whoever runs your meetings, if you could have 5 minutes to tell your neighborhoods that you're on this committee and what this committee, you could be brief, but tell them what we're all about and what we're trying to do, and encourage your neighbors to give you information, ideas, and suggestions and things. That's how we're going to put together the best plan we possibly can. So if everybody would consider doing that, we'd love to hear from you at the next meeting how that went and how you were accepted. So Katie, if you would, you can tell us about the open house meetings.
Well, first of all, who went? Raise your hand. I might not have seen everybody. No.
Well, in that case.
We all did.
I was stuck flooring in my freaking bedroom that night, so.
They actually made a list. So you can't
I was out campaigning, I believe. Almost every night I was knocking on doors, almost every.
What if we'd been to Mobile?
Yeah, and thank you to all of you that did attend. It was a good time.
And just, first, this is just a reminder that Goodyear Connect is out there. It turns out I can't see your names, so I can't check up on you. I lied about internally, we're working on getting some business cards and some other outreach materials that we can give to you when you go to HOA meetings. We can hand out business cards. But right now, we have a direct link to Goodyear Connect, Goodyear Figure 2025. Those magnets are still a good way to tell people about it. So we'll get that to you. But just again, that's another way to. We need your help in getting the community on there. We've gotten some really cool ideas so far. One of them is actually getting implemented. There's an idea for pickleball courts, and we're implementing it. So, it's exciting, and we're really excited about it. So just real quick, I want to tell you how the open house meetings went. They were fabulous. We had over 150 residents come between 3 nights. First night was in this room, and you can kind of see we just had boards up so people could, at their leisure, walk through the board and participate. The second night was at Western Sky Middle School, which is north of I-10. Just another picture, you can see we had areas for people to write. People could write on Post-it notes, and we had dotting for voting. Here's a couple of the boards where we had, people could dot. And you'll see a couple of the handouts we had in your place with the readings for the next meeting about housing and neighborhoods. And we summarized the housing and neighborhood section for you now. We're still working on getting through all this information. The problem when you have successful meetings is there are a lot of comments to go through. But you'll see kind of what you'll be seeing on all the open house items when you look at that housing and neighborhood section. Last night was at Estrella. That was the most successful. 70 people attended just in the Estrella neighborhood alone. So we got a lot of great comments. And Leslie was there with her parks hat on, and the HDR, the transportation consultant, was also there giving comments. So then, I didn't even mention this to you guys because I knew it would be a lot to ask, but last week we went down to Mobile to meet with the residents down Ready?
Move right along,
So
please.
before we roll forward with this, I want us to all know what's gonna happen tonight. And I also just wanna put in a plug, not so much for the public meetings. I don't know if any of you saw in the paper, on Sunday, the front page article on the second section about Mesa being a sprawl buster. And if any of you read that article, you might have noticed that what Mesa is getting all these kudos about is exactly what you're doing in Goodyear. And, you know, one of the things is that, right, yeah, and I have to tell you, I did tweet, if you look at the tweets, you'll see I tweeted, I got kind of cranky, because I feel that you should get credit for all the work you've done. You're doing that ahead of Mesa, and frankly, you're doing an amazing job at it. And it just really brings to light the opportunities that we all have to either tweet about the Goodyear plan on that guy's article, write to the West Valley View, maybe, and mention what you're doing. It is pretty cool stuff, and this process is groundbreaking, and what you're doing is really part of a groundbreaking movement, so you should be proud. So I know that when we kind of go through some of this here, it doesn't seem so exciting, but I promise you when we step back and you get some outsider writing about it, like that guy that wrote about it in Mesa, you know, they're at the beginning of a journey that you've been on already for 5 months and made, or 6 months and made enormous progress. So credit to you, and you know, that reporter should have done some more legwork. So what we're doing tonight is really a big chunk of the plan. We're going to go through the land use categories. Katie's going to go through them again, talk about them in terms of the policies of the categories. And then what we're going to do is, when we're done with the categories, we're going to talk through the logic of why and where they are on the map. Okay, so the thinking is, first, get a feel for the places we want in Goodyear. Those are the land use categories, right? And when Katie goes through and says, are these a good description of places that could be at Goodyear? You don't necessarily have to put them on a place on the earth, but do these places make sense in our community? So, you know, the best thing I could say is, and it's not in there, but if she proposed an area where the minimum building height was 300 feet, you'd say, that's a ridiculous kind of a place to put in Goodyear. So that place wouldn't make sense for Goodyear. So the densities make sense, the kinds of uses make sense, the places she's describing make sense. We'll talk about that. What she's going to do is go through the first 5 categories. We're going to give you a little bit of time to just ask what I would call clarifying questions after each category discussion. But any kinds of questions for discussion, write them down on the file cards. That's why I gave you all file cards. And then we get to the end of the neighborhoods category, we're going to stop and just go through the cards. Okay? And then when we get through the land use, the category discussion, we're going to say, or the discussion of the places, we'll go through the map, and we'll talk through the map. At the end of the discussion, we're also going to invite anybody in the audience that is interested in making some general comments about the map and you know, the logic that was used to put places on the map, to just make those kinds of comments. And then again, we could discuss that a little bit more in the committee. And then Katie will go back and make revisions based on our discussion tonight. So this is our first shot, I would say, at really beginning to create the land use map. It will come back to you. So, you know, as we have discussions, you might say, all right, let's just see how this one pans out. We can discuss it again. This isn't our last time to look at the map. It's the first of, I think, 3, right? At least 3 times that we'll be looking at. So having said that, any questions before we go on?
So, just to reiterate, I can't say enough how, what a draft version this is. I'm looking through it like, oh, I forgot these policies I meant to add in. Color is wrong. I couldn't use that color to do that color, but, so just everything, that's why we're discussing it tonight. Everything is open to be changed. That's why I need to hear from you. Some things we're not going to talk about tonight. We're not going to talk about the overlays. We're going to kind of move that to the discussion when we talk about economic development, because most of them relate to economic development. And so I want those staff, well, actually, the staff members are here, but they're going to be making a presentation to you about the city's goals regarding economic development. And I think that's a better place for the discussion on the forward organization centers and stuff.
Does everyone understand how an overlay works and what that means? Is there anyone that wants a little just description of that?
Yes,
Yes.
describe that for us, will you?
Okay, so you have the land use category us one good year. I heard you guys talk about that too, but trying to unite the good year a little bit. So that seems to be a big theme coming out. That diverse destinations was a big keyword from the vision statement. And I changed this to employee assets. I didn't really know how to phrase it, but you had it as recognizing our assets, but I think kind of using our assets, you know, that's what we're trying to see, building upon. The phrase encouraging growth, and what I mean by that is not just necessarily outward expansion, but, you know, we've seen a lot of comments that we want new types of businesses, we want entertainment options, we want job growth, there's all sorts of things that fall under growth. And then that keyword sustainability. So I just want to stop, I don't want to have a long discussion about it, hopefully, but if someone just like, you know, you really destroyed this, you don't get it at all. Nobody just has heartburn over it. But, and you can see this is already a little different than what was in the text. I'm kind of trying to do this in the text, so that's what I mean. The text was so draft. I keep changing this, coming up with new things. I like that vision statement. So we're going to come back to these themes in a little bit. But let's start with the policies. And first I call these universal land use policies that kind of go broadly across all the land use categories. And so policy number 1 is copy of the chapter. It's trying to create a policy for overall residential density. And the purpose of that isn't to create a regulation, but to create kind of a goal, what we expect to see. And especially with us generalizing the land use plan, that might help us with infrastructure planning, if we kind of know what to expect in terms of the density. And you can see it's blank. And there's several blanks or areas highlighted in yellow that have numbers. That's something we need to discuss more. I think you have some more meetings and discussions we're going to go through that you'll learn a lot more, that we can then have this discussion at one of our later meetings. We talk about the land use plan. So there's some placeholder numbers in there. So policy 2 is real similar, and these ones I highlighted in red are the ones where you can see have the red where they're an existing policy. I've just pulled those out of the current general plan. Doesn't mean we have to keep them, but just so you know where they came from. And so the current policy is to try and have one job with 3 or 4 residents. I usually see it as a jobs to housing ratio with 3 or 4 residents is getting that over 1-to-1 jobs to housing ratio. Policy 3 is the graduated density concept. We talked a little bit about this, but in general, it's just saying, you know, we don't want to see very high density right next to very low density. We want to see it graduating from our natural features, and it just starts to get more and more dense until we have, you know, areas like our city center or high industrial areas. So there's a lot of density. And then I threw this graphic up there because I think that does kind of illustrate it a little bit. And then the last 3 policies that were included in the universal policies, and this is on page 3, by the way, if you're not there. Those are existing policies, and they relate to Air Force Base and putting residential leases around and Air Force Base contours. I'm just going to go ahead and move on.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Are the Goodyear Airport DNL lines designated on the plan?
They might not have been, I don't have a map.
Yeah, it is. They're on the dotted line, but there's no numerical representation on it.
Well, are they on? I don't see it on here.
Yeah, they
It
are.
might not have
Oh, not on that one, no.
Right.
No. It's on the current one, the one that we handed out.
So
So they need to get out.
Yeah, this one is,
Level, but 65 decimals.
well, how far do they go?
65 decimal?
Right, I'm looking.
Well, I don't want to focus too much on the map yet.
Okay, we want to just keep, we're not on the map, so you gotta wait for the map. Sorry, that's my job to be mean, but we're not on the map, so when we get there, we can talk about it. Okay, go.
65
Sorry.
But I should,
I have a
is
problem
there
with
any
the
other
policy.
clarification questions regarding these policies that we just went through? And then, like we said before, you can jot notes for yourself and we'll have a larger discussion.
do not, is stuff that, is anything that Katie said, just do not understand. Okay, if you have any questions about we're missing policies, or you think a policy is wrong, those are the kinds of things I want to put in the notes. Okay?
So next is agriculture, page 7. And the purpose of this is to designate areas specifically supposed to preserve. Obviously, there's lots of agricultural uses that are often used as a placeholder, but this would just be for those areas to preserve. So policy number 4 is, again, the 1 dwelling unit per acre, which is the minimum standard by the state. And policy 5 and 6 are currently in the plan. And the first one is just being sure to buffer the agricultural uses from neighborhoods because of the dust and everything they pick up. And then the 6th, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where this comes from, but it's requiring a minimum initial size of 40 acres for an agricultural use. I think at the general plan stage that can make sense. It's not talking about zoning. You're just trying to get at that. We only want to be dealing with large farms at the general plan stage. Clarification?
Yeah, Katie, do you have all this on a handout that we can follow with?
It was from last
meeting.
Last meeting, okay. Because there's a couple of us taking notes frantically because I haven't had the paper to follow. So
Yeah,
it's
does
in,
everyone have a copy, or were there some people who missed?
Does anybody not have a copy, and we'll make a couple more?
let's see, where is it? Last
We
meeting.
make a couple copies?
Everyone in the groups.
Everyone's here. Make us wait around.
Happy to do it, so if you need a copy, let's
Want to make sure nobody.
I need a copy.
Anymore. 2.
2 copies.
I completely left mine at home. I ran out of the building.
Okay, Katie.
3 copies?
No.
Okay.
No, I just have a comment.
Clarification?
Yes.
What?
On the 40 acres, the policy number 6. It seems to me like I have seen agricultural development in less than 40 acres. What is the consequence for less than 40 acres? Okay, that's fine.
Where that it was carried over, I mean, I'd be open to adjusting that.
Well, one of the things, just as clarification, just to remind you how the general plan works.
Right there is the 65.
And remember, there's what's on the ground that's existing. These general plans were put on top of, the regulatory parts of general plans didn't come until 2002, really. So they were put on top of existing land use. So if there was someone operating a farm on 20 acres, or if they had zoning to operate a farm on 20 acres, the
Grandfather.
general plan policy doesn't prohibit that. But if someone wanted to go in with a new land use, a new agricultural land use, and make it 20 acres, that policy, you know what I mean?
Yes,
would
yes.
prohibit it. It only stops, it only prohibits going forward, not what exists
Not
now. So what you
reverse.
may have been seeing could be older ag uses that have just continued, or that are zoned in the zoning permits act. And actually, Arizona zoning is cumulative, so you could probably farm any parcel you wanted, right, regardless of its land use category.
And thinking of it, it just came to me, it might also have something to do with there's, with taxes, there's an ag exemption. And so we might have been trying to,
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
encourage that.
yeah, there's a guy with a farm on Central Avenue.
And trying to make sure only farms have that ag exemption.
Okay, but that's, okay, so that, more or less, but we can get you that more information later. I just wanna get us moving, because we got so much to talk about, so I'm gonna be a little.
Okay. So now on to one of our bigger categories, scenic neighborhoods, and we're basically in a rural neighborhood zone. But again, I think I've mentioned this before, we don't want just density to define this zone. So just to give you an example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Vanderbilt Farms, it's at Cerebral and Hammer Road. It's a gorgeous custom home development. But as you look at this area, pictures, you can see the natural vegetation. That's what we're getting at with the city neighborhood. Because we have so many natural resources, it's creating a designation that allows us to help protect those natural resources, but still making sure development can happen in those really neat areas. So just, again, just you can really see the difference between those two types of areas. One's scenic, one's just large lot. So getting at the policies, policy number 7 is basically just saying that single-family residential is appropriate throughout this category. Policy 8 is encouraging cluster development, and just to show you, that's kind of what you just saw. You know, it's the grid system versus clustering the homes together so that we can start preserving some of those natural open spaces. And then something we want to give is in policy 9, what we're trying to get at is there might be instances, although we kind of say that in general it's 1 dwelling unit per acre, we might allow increased density or at least lots that are smaller than 1 acre lots if there's a reason for it. Perhaps there's a different kind of housing product. Perhaps they can preserve more open space if they create the lots a different way. Just some examples, and these might be a little difficult to see, but the picture at the top is just a really cool housing product. There's trees coming through the porches. Just an example of, you know, they might have needed more density to make that product work. The picture on the bottom is a hillside development. Again, they might need a little flexibility in the density to make a cool product like that work. This is a resort, not a house, but you can see how a lot of times when you're looking at some of these beautiful natural features, you might want to be able to cluster some of the homes together to maximize views. And so overall, you might have a lower density, but in one small area, it might look like a higher density to preserve views, preserve natural features, and we want to allow that. What we don't want to see are some of these pictures. The top, just a row of blank houses one on top of each other on a hillside. The bottom left, you can see there's typical suburban development. This is in Utah, and it's going right up that beautiful red rock. No change. It could be anywhere. And then the picture on the right is Nevada, and you can see it's just that subdivision is placed anywhere, and it's right next to a mountain without any thought of that mountain's there. That's what we hope not to see. We just want the development community to be recognizing these assets in these areas and using them and utilizing them. Back again, policy 10, we'd like to allow some recreational uses, and this is just a picture. Trailheads, there might, you know, because these are going to be connected to open space areas, again, there might be some recreational facilities. Policy 11 is to allow some agricultural uses. You can see how a lot of these people might have horses, maybe even some chickens or goats if the development is planned for that and they are large enough. And then we also, policy 12 is to allow resorts in this area if they're developed the same way, if these resorts are developed in a way that works with the nature. And you can think about, you know, if you've ever been to the Biltmore Resort, there's houses all around kind of almost intermingled with the resort, and there's a lot of resorts like that. So you can see how maybe that could happen in certain areas too, where there might be a resort that kind of works with some residential development as well. So I think that's it for scenic neighborhoods. So is there any clarifying questions?
Everybody understand what's, okay. So everyone has a good feeling for what recreational uses are, those are outlined in the policies, everyone understands we're talking about agricultural uses, that's outlined. Everyone feels comfortable with the term cluster development. Okay, we just want to make sure before we go forward. Yes. I'm sorry, I wasn't standing so bad. Go ahead. Question?
How is the limited agriculture such as grazing going to work with sort of the leashing and the gating laws? Because most of this is going to be north of Rainbow Valley Road, won't it?
Right, and they have to work with that. In general, that's kind of almost getting into the zoning ordinance stuff, whether there has to be fencing or not. Yeah, that's, you have to build a pretty fence, that looks nice.
You know, I think that's an important design consideration, so I would write that down, so we have sort of a record of that as you go forward in the policy. Okay, any other kinds of clarifying questions? Go ahead.
Just a suggestion maybe, in the glossary, to define cluster development. Just to clarify it maybe in the glossary we have.
Maybe like by number of houses,
Do you have a name? Yes, they
Yeah,
should.
acres, I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
whoever just got copies didn't get a full copy, sorry. Didn't get the glossary. You got what you need tonight.
Denise, go ahead.
Policy 9B talks about transfer of development rights. Just briefly, are development rights something which is inherent with ownership of property? Or is a development right some specific right that is granted by a specific document, ordinance, whatever?
Okay, that's a great question. If
Oh,
it's
that's
okay,
why I
I'm
asked
even
it.
gonna back it up.
Can you let her answer it,
Does
please?
everybody understand TDR? Does anybody want us to talk about transfer of development rights? Okay, so what-
Thought I just did.
Typically, what it's gonna refer to is someone has zoned rights to a certain number of lots. But maybe that zoning was approved a long time ago or is approved to a county, but now we recognize, you know what, actually this is an area we'd like to preserve for open space. So we might work with the developer to say, you can say you can build 200 units according to your zoning. We're gonna allow you to build those 200 units somewhere where you wouldn't normally be allowed to build those 200 units, so you can preserve that space. So it might be allowing them to have a much higher density in a different area. It might be allowing them to build residential somewhere where it wasn't previously put in the plan. And typically, when you have a transfer of development rights program, you designate those areas. You designate the sending properties, the areas where you want houses to come out of, and you designate areas that are receiving properties, the areas where you decide, you know, that could take some more density, that could take some more units. So if we went forward with this, it would either be up to a developer to say, you know, I want to try this out, or the city might have to launch a program and decide where these sending and receiving properties are. We're just putting it in the general plan to have the option.
More commonly, a TDR would be if you have a hillside area, let's say, for example, and your property were zoned at 8 units to the acre, you would transfer the units off the hillside and maybe put your hillside at 0 units to the acre, and the flatlands could go to whatever the the density you're allowed plus everything you transferred off the hill. So it works between properties if the city chooses to allow it, and it can work on one property pretty much now is sort of a matter of course. And the rights that you were asking about, I don't think we really got to your question, where do those rights come from? You don't get development rights through the general plan. Those have to be through the entitlement, through the zoning. So even if you have a general plan designation of neighborhoods, or let's say scenic neighborhoods, that allows whatever the density range is, I don't know, 4 we say, or 1 unit to the acre, what that could mean is that you still have to have the zoning to build that before you can transfer those units around, if that makes sense to you. So if your property were zoned for ag, like R40, rural 40, 1 unit to 40 acres, the general plan of 1 unit to the acre doesn't give you the right to another 39 units. You need to get the zoning first, and then you can move the units. Did that answer the question?
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm perceiving from this, it says, if it's a baseline of 1 dwelling unit per acre, but it can be increased due to a transfer, basically you're saying is, we will let you do more than 1 here if you agree to do something less than is called for somewhere else. Correct?
That's the
Okay.
clarification, yes. Yes.
Okay, so then I'm gonna move on to neighborhood category. So this is our big category, what is neighborhood? We're hearing a lot, we want connection and all these different things, so we're gonna create this neighborhoods category that includes a wide range of densities and also commercial uses, public facilities, all those things that we want to be near and have serve our neighborhood. So now I'm on page 11. So yes, policy 13 is a big one. And I don't know if we're gonna get through this whole discussion tonight on this, but I wrote down a baseline density, and basically this comes right now, since we have several different categories, we have density ranges in those categories. So there'll be like low-density residential, 2 to 4 dwelling units per acre is allowed. There's this concept that's currently in the general plan called baseline density, whereas we kind of start you at the lower end of the spectrum, 2 dwelling units per acre. So when you come into a rezone, you kind of assume, all right, you're starting with 2 dwelling units per acre. But then, if you do certain things to increase the quality of your development, you could earn your way up to 4 dwelling units per acre. So we have a list of those things. I think that's something that can be improved. It's not really detailed in the general plan right now. So it's things like enhanced landscaping, additional open space, enhanced entry features. Those kind of things work your way up from that 2 dwelling units per acre to 4 dwelling units per acre. Because the idea is that's a tool the city has in its pocket to get better development. We can allow additional density. And so that's how we get certain things we want to see in developments. Does that kind of make sense, what baseline density is?
Yes.
This is one of those problems that, as a staff member, I'm thinking, it is a great tool. How do we keep it with this large, wide range category I'm creating? You know, I feel like I'm almost shooting myself in the foot with this. I'm throwing out the idea that maybe we do throw out a baseline density just for this whole category, and that we might create then those features, those amenities that we want to see that'll earn people more density. Does that idea make sense?
It does to me.
Okay, just as she's explaining it, we're gonna talk about the merits in a minute, okay? So far, is she conveying well? Okay.
That's why I put a note. It needs further discussion, highlighted in yellow. It does. This is going to need a lot of time dealing with this one thing. So moving on, the next 3 policies are kind of talking about, you know, what I heard from you is, you know, this big neighborhoods category sounds great and all, but how do we protect areas? How do we make sure we get that graduated density concept? You know, how do I know that there's not going to be something I don't want built right next to my home? So this is what I'm trying to figure this out a little bit. So policy 14 is basically saying if you're up to 5 dwelling units per acre, that's pretty,
Yes.
you know, fine. You can go anywhere, and we're okay with that. Now, if you get into and this is one where I've already seen policy 15 and 16 aren't very different, and they need to be revised. I don't know what I'm thinking. But between 5 and 12 dwelling units, to me, that's kind of an in-between category. You're going to see different product types, not typically tract homes, but you're also not to these high-density apartment units either. And so those, you know, we might allow, we want to specify certain areas for those, but they're going to be allowed a little bit more places than the higher density. Where policy 16 is, then when you're getting up into the higher density, this is probably going to be multifamily. If you're over 12 dwelling units per acre, that's when we're going to say there's only certain areas we want to see you locate. And again, we don't have lots of time for discussion. This is one area where I'd love for you to write down comments. Like, you know, you said arterials, I don't agree with you. It should only be freeways. Start writing those comments down now about what you think. But I'm going to diverge from this for a second to talk about density. We talked about it a little bit before, but I've got a nice presentation, I think, on density, so we can start imagining what this will look like. So the first thing, this is Pebble Creek. Unit 1, first phase. I think it's the Eagle's Nest side.
Can I just, before you go through this, so everybody is clear, and I know this is like, we're making this like step by step, but I just want to, you know, segment by segment, be able to put away each block. Everybody is comfortable or not comfortable with, understands the idea of Katie saying certain density categories can go in the neighborhoods area with certain rules. We can discuss what those rules are later, but we all kind of get the idea that that's sort of how we're going to do these density categories. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure, okay, go ahead.
Sounds good. Okay, so this one is 1.09 dwelling units per acre. These aren't acre lots, but the density works out to just over 1 dwelling unit per acre. So here's the map, here's the plat. We look at lot width of a lot to kind of measure how big a lot is. So these are 65-foot wide lots, which is one of our larger lots that's not custom home. Here's an aerial photo of the area, so you can start seeing what it feels like. And here's some pictures on the street. about one dwelling unit per acre look like typical single-family homes. This is
1.9,
code.
right?
1.9 acres.
Which is almost 2.
No, it was 1.09.
Oh, 09, okay, okay.
I got a question to that calculation. Are they throwing that 1.09, are they throwing the golf courses into it?
Absolutely.
You know, I don't get it. If that's what's on the plat,
It's gotta be the average of the golf course and the
It has
residence.
to.
they have to.
It has to be.
Gotta be.
Yeah,
There's no way.
Tony probably worked on it, so he's not.
Well, that's part of my problem with the picture. I mean, it's actually, if you just look at the concentration of housing, it's probably more like, I'd say, 3 or 4
Yeah.
per acre.
4 per acre.
But if you throw the golf courses in, or the
And the street.
tracks or everything else, it starts to come lower.
That's my problem with density too,
Okay,
is
yeah.
sometimes it's
All
hard
right.
to measure. That's why
Okay, so I
always
think
put
a
the
really
lot.
good comment to write down, kind of with regards to that one, is when we look at these densities, do we really look at them and include all the amenities in the overall calc or not? Because I think that's an important point. Thank you, Tom.
But you saw those Vanderbilt Farms and the Estrella, I already showed you, those are pretty much 1 acre lots, that's within 1 acre lots.
Are the streets included as well as part of the amenities?
Arterial roadways are not supposed to be included, but other roadways.
Local streets are.
Okay, that's part of it.
The general plan defines how you calculate density, and you take out school sites, commercial sites, and arterial roadways. So then this is Pueblo Verde. So this is at Cerebral and Yuma, and it's catty corner from that fried marketplace. The fire station is right there. So this is 226 dwelling units per acre, 65-foot and 60-foot wide lots. So again, you can see how on the left, there's like a 65-foot wide lot, on the right, there's 60-foot wide lots. And, you know, as Todd pointed out, it kind of actually looks similar to the other picture you saw, except there's not a golf course surrounding it. And here's some pictures of the homes on the street. They're pretty big, large homes.
Homes right here.
So Palm Valley Phase 1, this is an area on Litchfield and Palm Valley Boulevard. Then north of the clubhouse, 3.8 dwelling units per acre. There's the plat, these are 55-foot wide lots, so, you know, you can see how the lots are getting smaller. Here's an aerial of the neighborhood, and here's some pictures on the street. You can, just as an aside, you can see how this is an older area. There's not as much stone. The colors of the houses are more similar, whereas some of the newer neighborhoods you'll look at, you'll see more stone and different designs of the houses. So, you know, here's another case of how density is confusing. So this is an area in Palm Valley Phase 1. So overall, it's just under 5 dwelling units per acre, it's 4.94. But part of it is court homes, and those are over 6 dwelling units per acre. Part of it is typical single-family tract housing, which is 4.16. These plats actually came in separately, but if the whole area was being zoned, you probably would have called that under 5 dwelling units per acre. So that would be falling under this can go anywhere kind of category. So there's an aerial, so you can kind of see the difference between the court homes and the single family. This is a close-up of the court homes. So these are 65-foot by 65-foot wide lots. Whereas the other 65-foot wide lots were probably 120 feet in depth. This is basically putting 2 homes on one of those Pebble Creek lots. But we call these court homes. You might be able to see it, how there's kind of almost four in a pod, and they have a shared driveway. And so they don't have as much open space, they don't have a backyard, but they have trails. You know, and it's a good product. A lot of people don't want to take care of a yard. Seasonal residents a lot of times don't want to leave a yard if they go. And that's right adjacent, here's some pictures on the street, so you can see they're really nice units. And then the single family are about 60-foot wide lots. And so they're working well right next to each other. It's a gated community. It's really nice. Yes.
Just a comment back on Pebble Creek Unit 1. Pebble Creek Unit 1 was the original model village, and if you go there, the streets are not normal width streets. They are only, what's a normal street, 33 feet? Well, you can get 2 cars side by side, curb to curb. It was built as a model village, and it was grandfathered in when it was converted. So that's part of why it seems, well, that would make it even seem higher.
Yeah.
But if you,
Golf course.
well, the golf courses are not part of the plot.
And then again, just to show an example of different densities working together, this is the Estrella Lakes area, and here's all the different densities that's around the lakes. So we have that anywhere from 1.8 up to almost 5 dwelling units per acre around that area. And so, yeah, so this is kind of where we are now. This is kind of that cutoff of the way I wrote the policy. Up to 5 dwelling units per acre, you can go anywhere. So far, what you've seen is something, are all products and developments that would basically be allowed just about anywhere. So, does that make sense? So now we're about to get into areas where we're going to restrict it a little more. We want to see these areas near arterial roadways or near some significant open spaces or some other amenities.
Before you go, does anybody have any clarifications on the term anywhere? I know we're just going step by step, but we just want to make sure everybody's kind of got it all. We're good?
Good.
Okay, go.
So this is Palm Valley Phase 2, and this is a 5.2 dwelling unit per acre development. So already they're down to 32-foot wide lots. Copies of that, so they're pretty narrow lots. And this is probably one of the smallest projects I've seen where they're doing single-family tract housing on smaller lots in Goodyear.
The golf course.
So here's an aerial, but yeah, I mean, this is an example, it doesn't fall in the anywhere category, but I would see that this would be allowed for our policies because it has this huge open space around it, it's kind of mitigating the higher density. And just here's some pictures of what it looks like across from the golf course, those are some up-close pictures, you can see how it's a different product than we've seen on some of the others, because it's much more narrow. They can't get as big of garages on these lots as some of the other lots. So this is another good example. This is Rio Paseo. So it's just north of the mall site. It's on Bullard Avenue and Encanto. And again, this is a great example of kind of what we want to see with the graduated density. You have the single family up at the top, and then we have court homes at 8 dwelling units per acre, triplexes at almost 11, and then a multifamily dwelling unit at almost 18. And it's working its way up as it gets closer to the commercial and the arterial roadway. So to me, this is a perfect example of what we want to see. Just, you can see that's just where it falls on the site. There's a roadway separating the court homes and the single family, and the density increases as we move on. So here's an aerial of that area, and you can see it's only partially developed. So looking, these are the court homes. And so they're kind of similar to those other ones we saw in Palm Valley. So you can see they kind of front onto these trails, and then in the back they have, again, kind of almost a shared driveway or alley, if you will. So we're seeing this is a different type of product as we get to those higher densities. And then these are the triplexes. And so we're still under that 12 dwelling units per acre. So this is the in-between. And I don't have a picture of these on the street, but they're really similar to the court homes. There's kind of an alley for the garages, and then there's a trail that separates them where they have kind of a front porch area. So these, again, are still in that middle category at just under 11 dwelling units per acre. Whereas this apartment complex, albeit Estrella Falls, this is almost 18 dwelling units per acre. So this is we're looking for this to be on an arterial roadway or next to some significant open space. So this is the highest category we have. And here's just some pictures of that on the street. And then just another example of higher density. Oh, sorry.
Quick question, Katie. You're talking about density and how many units per acre, how many dwellings. In a single-family neighborhood, single-family dwellings, is there a minimum between dwellings in the planning and zoning? Minimum footage?
That depends on the,
Yeah,
depends on the zoning, like a side yard you're talking about.
yeah, between buildings.
It depends on the zoning for that specific product. So you,
For a single-family tract home, it's going to be about 5 feet. Our zoning ordinance.
Minimum.
5 feet.
And the property line. So it's 10 feet But if you start getting into support homes, these different housing
Right.
product types, that might
Can vary,
be allowed
sure.
somewhere.
Okay.
Influenced by the building code. Building code also requires certain separation. If you go less than 5 feet, then you can't have openings in the wall, you can't have windows and stuff, so.
Katie,
Both.
And isn't it also governed by height as well, like if you had a two-story product, or, you know, like if apartment complex buildings need to be a different, so it does depend very much on the product, but I think for single-family homes, the best way to say it is, you know, 10 feet between homes is the minimum.
Yes. Okay. All right, so this is Pyramids of Palm Valley at Thomas and Litchfield Road. So this is a condo project. And so you can see the aerial here. And again, this is a side note. We would allow this under our current policies as is, but we'll talk about it in a minute. But we would actually today, under what I'm proposing, require a little bit more open space separation between the condos and the houses. You can see these houses back right in. And one area of concern I see is there's parking. Basically, someone's front-end parking next to someone's wall in the back of their house. So we'll talk about that policy in a second, where we'd like to see a little bit more buffering between single-family and multifamily developments. But otherwise, it's gorgeous development. Here's some pictures from the street. It has great articulation. So as I just said, this policy 17 is basically, we're kind of leaving out that middle category because that's our transition category. But when you have those single-family developments that are under 5 dwelling units per acre, we want to see some kind of separation between those and the higher density of those 12 dwelling units per acre. So this is one of our older apartments, Greenwood Apartments. It's on Van Buren Street, just east of Litchfield Road. So this is one area where, you know, we did see problems because of this, because you can see there's kind of an alley right behind the houses, and we would put the dumpsters back there, trash would build up, they'd get rats. And so we just want to see some separation. It's not that it couldn't happen at that location. We're just learning now from past mistakes that we want to see a little more separation. This is an area, this is northern subdivisions, and I know there's other problems with these apartments, but they used a roadway to separate between the multifamily and the housing, so that's a good separation. And then back to the Rio Paseo example, this would work well too, because they used that middle density category to separate between the single family and the multifamily, and then you have an arterial between the multifamily and the single family to the west, the east.
Okay, so
Question?
what I want to do now is give everybody a chance to, have you guys been writing down questions?
Yep.
Is there any clarifications? What I'm going to do is just,
There, I still got three more.
what I want to do is start collecting those so I can begin to group,
Oh,
okay? So, you guys have any comments you've been writing down?
Yep.
So I can
start writing them down now.
start writing them down.
Meaning just you?
Have any cards for me?
Bad people?
No?
And even if it's not something I
Good
said,
idea.
but something you see in the text that you read it.
Right, so we can kind of talk about these topics, okay?
So policy number 18 is starting to talk about where we don't want to see single family. So, you know, I didn't say anywhere, but it's
Isn't that in conflict of 15?
what, number 18?
Yeah.
Yeah, 15 says maybe.
It says 5 dwellings may be considered along
Right.
arterial
But
freeways.
policy 18 isn't saying it's not allowed, it's just saying you need a buffer. So here's an example. Here is I-10, this is Canyon Trails, right next to the Walmart.
That was not good.
So single family was built next to I-10, and so it's okay, but they used a 100-foot buffer, create a buffer between the interstate and the single
I
family.
think they're building a wall now, but still not very
Because
good.
it's saying it's not appropriate unless significant buffers are utilized. So that's one thing, is we need to get more pictures in this text. You know, some of these pictures that we showed, this is picture. We have had proposals to have backyards abutting ADOT right away. That's not what we want to see. This 100-foot buffer just gives that little bit of buffer that makes it. So then policy 19 talks about where multifamily is specifically encouraged, which comes from some of our discussions. Policy 20
well, I had it here also, but in all the policies, does the number of houses per acre include the buffer areas, the acre itself, the buffer area, the sidewalk, and any other amenities of
Well,
space?
you know what, I got a card on that, so, perfect, you have the second card, I have another card on it, so.
Okay, but let's
Got another card. Yes.
I'm not sure if it's on topic or off topic, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Do we have already a tentative date for that Estrella Falls Mall? I mean, that's gonna impact a lot of what we're talking about here.
Fall 2016?
2016
Maybe,
is what was stated at the council meeting.
They're talking about for the 14
You
years.
know, though, I think you bring up a really good and important point.
Another
One of
$1 million
the
payment from them.
things that we've all learned from development is that, and I think that's why we have general plans, is zoning always changes. You know, if something doesn't get built for 5 years, someone's gonna go back and adjust the zoning or adjust the densities, because that product needs to meet the market at that time the landowner or the developer is willing to build. But the general plan kind of defines for infrastructure planning for other reasons, so we know the kinds of communities we're building, the bigger picture. So in the case of Estrella Falls, when you think of it as one big honking commercial development. But don't think of it as the picture of Estrella Falls that you've been given. Because, and this may not be the case in Estrella Falls situation, but that can always change. The zoning may change. If it's heavy-duty commercial, they may decide to wipe out that mall, and although their zoning doesn't permit it, within the general plan, there's still choices about the kinds of commercial they could build. So they could come back with a whole new site plan. So don't think of the picture of Estrella Falls. Think of a big commercial area. What goes next to a big old commercial area generates a lot of traffic, a lot of noise, and a lot of activity 24/7.
Well, and that was my concern because, you know, if the land still sits there and sits there and sits there, then here comes a new plan, or maybe if the plan after this plan, where it will get rezoned and now forget the mall, and maybe some other commercial thing's gonna happen, and then that is gonna impact, you know, what we're trying to build here, so. That was my concern.
What it's going to impact is, what do you think goes next to busy, loud, noisy, active, 24/7 commercial? And that's how you need to think about it. And so, and it's really hard to step out of that. You know what I mean? Because all of us think about, even this approach is kind of thinking about the kinds of things we want, and we all design what a single-family neighborhood looks like in our head. You know, and I'll give you a really good example. Where I live, there's many single-family homes that are right in the same street as connected homes and court homes, and across the street from 4-unit pods. And so, you know, when you think about that neighborhood, and when that developer said, I'm building single-family, no one thought about all the other kinds of stuff he was going to pull in that development. So you just need to sort of think what goes next to that big, ugly, noisy commercial development. In Estrella Falls, the edges might be really cool. They might have right now currently all neighborhood scale commercial plans. It's awful. I mean, I'm not the right site plan, but I'm just kind of picking on you as an example, so not to pick on you. But I am, so sorry. So are there any other kinds of clarifying questions? Okay, so we're going to get into land use categories, and I think the first thing that we need to kind of work through is the idea of how we're going to calculate density. So we've got 3 cards on there, and the cards are, how are we going to calculate density? One says, for example, what are we including? Another one says the housing and densities include streets, parks, drainage areas, golf courses, clubhouses, sidewalks, easement, open spaces included in a neighborhood design. And then the third part says, how large a PAD covering a large area of development, how does that affect density decisions? So for example, if someone came in with 640 acres, which is a square mile, and they're providing parks and open space and all of those kinds of amenities, commercial areas in that square mile, and if you count all it in, it gets to 4 units to the acre, but the individual housing product might be at 6 units to the acre, or some might be at 18 units to the acre. How are we going to look at that PAD? And the example that was given on this part is Pebble Creek has a large amount of open space, golf course, which I expect has been applied apply to reduce the calculated density of adjacent residential plat. So where that matters is if a guy comes in with 80 acres, he doesn't have as much, or she, if it's a woman developer, doesn't have as much flexibility to alter those densities as if a guy with, or a woman with 640, acres came in. So how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that? That's where we want to start. What do you think?
Do you want me to tell you what we do now?
Yeah, that's a
Or-
good idea.
Okay, so what we do now, as I said, in the general plan, it tells us we calculate density by taking the acreage and removing arterial roads, school sites, and commercial areas. And so we do include open space areas, basically, because we're giving them that benefit. You create an open space area, you get to calculate that in and reduce your density because you're creating that open space area, which is a benefit. Now, what we typically do, because again, we only pull out the general plan really when we're looking at zoning in this case. So then they get the property zoned, and then we start going to final plats. And sometimes the density calculation changes depending on how they phase their development and create those final plats. But at that point, then we're using the zoning as our guide as we're looking at final plats and making sure those are okay with zoning. So sometimes when we look at the plats, the density might be different than we look at zoning documents.
So here's the brutal truth of that. The project that you saw with those smaller, narrow lot, what we're calling homes, I hate the word narrow home.
Yeah.
Those narrow lot homes with the golf course, and that was about what?
They were listed at 1.09, but I agree with you.
They're probably maybe 8 or 9 to the acre, maybe even 10 to the acre.
Yeah.
Those could go next to, given the current way we calculate density, because we've got that nice open space of the golf course, a single-family 5 or less project,
So, yeah.
right? So, that's right now what could happen. So that's how we calculate density now. Is that something that we
Just
want
to add one more piece, the general plan, throughout the plan, encourages and rewards large master plan communities. And you can imagine that it is a benefit when, a community like Estrella or Palm Valley, Canyon Trails is doing a plan, and they're saying this is gonna be high density and this is gonna be low density. It's planned out. A resident can look and, get a hold of those master plans. So in some ways, it makes sense that they might get a little bit more leeway since they're doing that master planning for an area. And so it works the same. There's not a different calculation for density for master plan communities, but we do currently allow a little bit more leeway with master plan communities.
as we move towards infill?
But we're gonna talk about, when we talk about the map, that infill and master plan communities might be kind of different. You might wanna think about two different things.
Because as we move towards infill, those parcels are smaller and they are more constrained. And a lot of times they'll have development on 2 sides of them or 3 sides of them. So what do you think about how we calculate density? Is the current way good? Do we want to leave open space in the calculation? Do we want to take it out? I mean, that's really the question that we're asking. I see George shaking his head no, he thinks the current way is good. Talk a little bit about it.
Well, you have to give the developer an incentive to create the open space. He's going to build it. He's going to set up the mechanism that's going to maintain it because the cities, they won't maintain it. So in order to give him that ability, you need to allow him to develop a larger area, use the whole area for his density calculations, and then if he creates open space, it's to the benefit of the people within that little planning area.
Does anybody have any comments about it now? Go.
So, did you say that anything under an arterial can be considered open space as well?
It's
It's part of the
calculated in the
calculation.
density, so it
It's-
sort of is like open
Well, what
space,
happens
but
if it's,
not.
what happens if the road's dedicated back to the city then?
It's treated the same whether they're
Really?
private or city.
See, I'm not sure that's right.
So, okay, so talk a little bit more about
Well,
that. Give
because,
us another way
you
of
know,
thinking about it.
I mean, obviously, if you're a private developer and you're required to put in the right of way, maybe, I'm looking at it not necessarily from a developer standpoint because they want as much density as they can get on it because the cost of the land. But on the other hand, if the city's getting the piece, the right-of-way, I don't think it should be part of the development, I mean, calculated as part of the open space requirements. And then the other issue I take with is on stormwater retention. Is that part of open space?
Yep.
It's considered open space, it's not
Okay.
treated differently.
Because you can make a park out of it. Essentially, right?
Right, you could, yeah.
Okay, so far we've got 3 comments, and we're gonna talk about all. We've got keep the parks or the open space in the calculation, and take the roads out and detention areas out. Mike, so far? Okay, someone else, go ahead.
I think there needs, I don't disagree with that at all, but density to me, of a layperson, interprets that as how close to my neighbor's window am I? And I think there needs to be a component of the calculation that looks at the density of the housing unit areas only. An extreme example, a guy could come in with a square mile and pick an eighth of that and build apartment complexes, and if you include all the land, he's at 1.89 units per whatever. How do we allow and encourage that open space, which is one component of acceptable non-density, and at the same time limit the density of the practical residential portion where you're looking at house-to-house, dwelling unit to dwelling unit?
Can I push you a little bit on that question, just to ask a clarifying question for my sake? Are you thinking that, what you wanna see is kind of like to like at the edges? Is that where you're going with that? Or is it like to like across the board?
I'm suggesting that perhaps on a large scale, particularly in a PAD, you encourage open space and you count that golf course or that whatever in a baseline to calculate a baseline density, which would be smaller, but you also have another limit that says in the blocks of houses, you know, maybe the easiest way to say it, at least conceptually, would be discount the large blocks of complete open space, like a golf course or something, and recompute the density at that, and say, I will allow, but you can't exceed
So you wanna
this
have-
other number.
So you wanna have like an overall site floor and a residential only area or developed only area ceiling.
I don't know whether it's practical to do that and
No, but that's-
to stipulate that in code, but that's, but the effect is what I'm looking to get.
Okay. You had a comment?
Yeah, mine was like maybe a caveat, like the developer needs to have the flexibility to allocate the diverse densities within a specific area, okay? But there should be, in complement, Mark?
Mark, yeah.
In complement to what Mark said, there must be a minimum caveat there, a minimum ranges of density there that the developer needs to be tied into it. And now, and that depends, that like George was saying, also, you know, that the arteries and the collectors and seeing all that space is included in the density. That depends on who is going to do the maintenance of all that space, because that needs to be included. If the city, if that is going to be transferred to the city, you know, that space that provide the facility for garbage collection, etc., you know, then it's up to the city then the density count needs to be changed.
Okay, so let me try to rephrase what you said, to make
Okay.
sure that I understand it. What you're saying is, if the developer's paying for the maintenance of the right-of-way, paying for the maintenance of all the parks, the density is sort of on him.
Right.
It's not that important to you.
No,
But if he's dedicating streets and right-of-way and parks to the city, then the density is important to you, because the
Yes.
city's paying.
it's paying, it's the whole maintenance, right?
Okay, you're getting there.
Okay.
Okay, So let me just write that one down. So it's, I'm gonna say density depends on ownership in your case.
Ownership and
that
maintenance, and maintenance.
And would you say that higher or lower density, if the city takes on the maintenance and the ownership, is it higher density or lower density?
Well, that needs to be analyzed because there are there are minimum parameters there that has to be respected also, like distances from house to house and distances from
Okay,
the street.
okay, working our way around. Go ahead.
Might we want to discount commercial open spaces? The sort of the golf course style, the commercialized centers versus just the open spaces, as it were?
So you're saying that in our density calculations, true parks, as opposed to something where you have to pay a fee to get in, should have different considerations in the calculation.
Yeah.
Okay. So so let me ask you another clarifying question. A guy comes in with 80 acres, he has a 10-acre park, you guys are freaking on that one, even a 20-acre park. And he has 80 acres with a 20-acre park, but it's an HOA owned and managed park, which means only people in that 80 acres can use it. Is that counted the same way a golf course is counted, or is that counted as open space?
I would say for consistency, we'd want to have it counted the first way.
So
Simply
anything
for
that's
formally
privately
consistent.
owned and managed, which goes back to what we said before, anything that's privately owned and managed gets counted one way, and everything that's publicly accessible, true publicly accessible, gets counted as open space.
Yes.
Okay?
Open space has nothing to do with ownership.
Okay, who is next?
Oh no, I was along the lines of what he was saying. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I just need clarification. I was going to pull it up my phone, but are we delving into state statute situations with density and defining density, or are you trying to define open space?
We're trying to define how we define density. And you're allowed to each jurisdiction's allowed to define it its own way.
Define it its own way, because I know, like back east, you have density is defined very different because the masses are very different, and so
Right.
they look at density a very much a different way, and they allow higher densities because their densities are calculated different. Here and across most of the municipalities, densities are very similar, and there are state statutes too that define density, right?
We have to define it in the plan, but it doesn't tell you how.
Okay.
It's actually land uses and intensities. I don't think it says density.
So, and maybe, I mean, like I said, if we're crossing those lines, we'd look at how we define the open space and whether it includes and what it doesn't include.
Okay, so we've got some of that. Okay, coming around, Todd, you got some things to say.
Yeah, I'm first of all, talking about parks and roadways and everything else. Part of the unholy alliance with most municipalities and developers is usually the right-of-way and parks and open space are given to the city, first of all, okay? So there's a little bit of that going on, which is sort of a balancing act between those kinds of things and sort of the density that developer gets. The issue of some of the rights-of-way in terms of the physical pavement. Let's say you have a 130-foot right-of-way. The physical amount of pavement in there is substantially less, which is basically you have some landscape and buffer zones on the periphery of the right-of-way. So that a little bit figures into the calculation because usually the way the city has it, that everything back behind I think it's the curb, gets maintained by the adjacent property owner anyway. So there is, again, part of this a little bit of, okay, we do this, you do that. So a lot of that maintenance gets thrown on to the adjacent property owners, so that's there. As to the density to a product, I think what you have to think about is that certain projects and certain products, they're uniquely dense. I mean, and people choose to live there. So if I choose to live in an apartment, I choose to live cheek to jowl to George. And so then the question is, for that product, how much open space do you want to have? And, people that live in apartments, other than maybe a community pool, they're fine with it because for economic reasons or a variety of other reasons, they want that density.
Okay, so what I heard you say was maybe when we look at our density calculations, instead of talking about is density in or out of the calculation, we say, is there a minimum level of open space that we want, given certain products? And I know that's sort of, but I'm just trying to get us to a place where we can get to. So because we have a few other topics to discuss, and I want us to get to the map. And remember, we're going to come back to this, all right? What I want to kind of do is summarize the key ideas that came out, and then I'm going to kind of hand them off to Katie, but I'm going to ask by a show of hands, I'm going to read them out, if any of them causes such incredible heartburn, okay, with a vast majority of the group, that maybe we just set that aside for now, all right? And you don't have to solve that problem over the next couple of months, all right? So, listening to this conversation, I'm going to suggest that it seems that overall, publicly accessible open space is okay to include in a density calculation. Yes?
No.
Are you saying it to the exclusion of private open space?
I'm just starting on publicly, yes, to the exclusion of private. Okay, we'll get to private, we can add that in.
Okay.
But it may not make it in, because I'm giving you a heads up.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. If we're going to start with that discussion,
we need to separate them out. So the idea right now is to cause anyone heartburn if when Katie comes up with these density recommendations, the overall assumption is publicly accessible open space, things like parks, really basically public parks or public plazas are included in the calculation. And that would include, I think, big sidewalk areas and setback areas that are accessible to the public. Does that cause anyone major heartburn? One person, two people. Okay, given the fact that it's only a few people, I'm going to let Katie kind of begin to work on that problem, acknowledging that we don't have complete consensus.
Point of clarification, what's the difference between public and private?
Publicly accessible means anybody and their brother can walk on it and use it.
Okay, but
So an HOA park is private. An HOA park that the city couldn't schedule a league in is private.
Well, okay, you got to step back now. Let's just talk about
There are-
HOAs. That means is that what you're having to do is if I live in let's just say I live in Pebble Creek, and my grandchildren want to come to visit me, I'm sorry, folks, but you can't come there.
Well, no. If you live in Pebble Creek and your grandchildren want to come and visit you, you're a Pebble Creek homeowner, they can use the park in Pebble Creek.
Yeah, but they're not property owners.
Well, but they're there as your guest.
Well,
I mean, come on.
I'm not
The
just
HOA
saying
doesn't
it's-
prevent.
Your HOA gets to make the rules.
Right.
Who's allowed.
But the city isn't going to
But
be.
the
able
city
to
does
schedule
not
it.
kick people from playing soccer
The
out
HOA doesn't
of these
schedule it.
parks.
We don't, but HOA.
I can't go use the tennis.
So let's go to the next part, so private open space.
Can't use
I think
tennis
this
courts
is
in
gonna be a
Australia.
tough one. Now when we look at private open space, and I'm gonna include in private open space, anything that's owned and maintained, the city can't schedule a public event there. Okay? So someone in your neighborhood can, if they're not in your neighborhood, or if they're not a guest of someone that lives in your neighborhood, they can't use it, theoretically. They can't use it. They could theoretically be asked to leave. Okay? That means that the Goodyear Little League can't just go to the city and say, I want to schedule a soccer game on that open space. Are we really opposed to including that in the calculations of density? Now, one thing that I'd say is, it may be that the density levels change if we take that out. Maybe the density levels get higher than we allow, because we're not including that additional open space in it. So, is there a real problem with including open space? And again, think about, it's the quality of the development, not do I let someone use my open space. It's, we look at these other things that are 5 units to the acre. A lot of them already are privately open space. We accept them as 5 units to the acre. So, is it really an issue? Is it an issue in terms of the density if the open space is there? Is the ownership the issue?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I don't understand. The first item we just determined, did that not say, are we as a group, the majority, in favor of including only public space in the density?
No.
And now you're asking,
I'm asking,
what
are
about
you
the private?
I'm asking, are you willing to add private to it? That's what I'm asking. Are you
Well,
willing
why
to
would I
add-
say
I
one
thought they
answer to the
covered-
other and then change it in the second answer?
You're not changing it, you're saying, are you willing to add private to it? So, because there seemed to be a debate on public and private, so now I'm saying, we agree that public should be included in the calculation. That's one level of open space. It's a very low level. So now.
I thought
do we wanna
you
add
said
private?
only in that.
No. Add private too. Are we willing to add private too? If you think only, then you're not willing to add private too. Or are we willing to add private too?
Can I ask something? I'm not understanding what this has to do. If someone moves into Pebble Creek, okay, I can't go on their golf course unless I pay, okay? But I don't live there, and it's not my home that is being calculating the density. I don't understand, like, if you live in a gated community, I don't see why this even matters,
That's
really.
you are hitting it right on the nail. What we're talking about is the density. So Pebble Creek is what, 5? Majority of Pebble Creek is what, 4 to the acre?
3 to 4.
3 to 4 to the acre. It has a lot of open space. There are areas that are higher than 4 to the acre. There are areas that are lower than 4 to the acre. It's private open space, but it's there, and that addresses the density of development. Some people are saying that we should now not, when we give a landowner density, why are they able to include all this other stuff in, so they can get either a higher or lower density. And what we're just asking is the way we calculate density now working for you?
Well, I think people are gonna buy the homes that they're gonna buy, and if you know, you got a 40-acre development, and I didn't want a big lot, I wanted a swimming pool and nothing else, because I lived on an acre, and it's no fun doing the yard work. You know, so people are gonna move into the lot that they want, and I don't understand why we're trying to argue this for a long time.
Okay, fair enough. What I'm gonna do is, we're gonna table it, I'm gonna let you fight it out, deal with it, and the next time we come back, you're gonna have to figure out how we're calculating density given this.
Yeah, what I wanna focus more on is not, again,
More on the issues.
well, no, I mean, I feel like we maybe diverged too much.
Yeah,
The
okay.
pictures I showed you, did you agree with the pictures I showed you? That the pictures you saw, the ones I said could go anywhere, that made sense. The ones I said we might want a little regulation or use this buffer, did that make sense? The ones I said, you know, we really need to think about where these go, arterials, open space. Did the pictures make sense to you? Because
Yes.
calculating density is my job.
Yes.
Were you saying, no, those apartments should be allowed anywhere? Nobody has heartburn over.
I like the graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all on
Well, I think
board.
the bigger question though, is the apartments gonna be allowed next to a housing development if those apartments have a golf course with them?
Have a what? A golf course with them?
Right, and that's why we're hung up on this. Go ahead.
I don't have a problem with the present calculating it as far as open spaces. And I live in a neighborhood that has 3 apartment complexes. One has a main street that runs adjacent to our apartment, or to our neighborhood, as their entrance. Perfect. We never have a problem with those people. Where we have a problem is when they have to drive through our neighborhood to get to their apartment building. That's what I don't want to see any more developments built like that. If you're going to build whether it's apartments or, well, condos or ownership, but if it's apartments, they need to be on a main street and not allow people to drive through a neighborhood to get to them. That's where the problem comes in, because
That's a
renters
really good way to put it.
don't care as much as homeowners
Okay.
for.
Okay, so maybe the guidance would be to arrange the rules so that doesn't happen.
And I have a follow-up for Joe. Maybe Joe can clarify this. We're talking about densities and everything from low to high to everything. Joe, is there a national number or a state number or anything that you work with, say per 100,000 people on an average density that is a mix from low to high that a community wants to try and achieve? Is there like a number like that should be the median number per acre?
I don't know that there's a national standard, it's not like parks per number of acres or parks per people or something like that. It really just kind of depends on the character, the type of character you want your community to have and where the density is located within your community. I read about a project in Scottsdale over the weekend that's doing 700 units on 4 acres. That's 160 units per acre.
Wow.
In downtown Scottsdale, so
Well,
it's perfectly fine, right where it is.
they're landlocked. They kind of have to go up probably,
The
but
comment I wanted to make about the topic of private versus public open space is that even though a lot of times our neighborhoods have private open space and that's restricted to the neighbors who live in the neighborhood, that's actually kind of a good thing for the city, because we're not in there maintaining those small parks. We as a community are not paying for the maintenance, and it tends to benefit the people who live closest to it. So, I understand the concern of having a large facility that maybe you think should be available to the public at large, and maybe that's where that kind of came from. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know if the city could afford to maintain all these little open spaces all over the community. So, just something else to kind of keep in mind.
Right.
Well, I guess the other thing too is, and I'll use it as a very gross example, the next time I build a subdivision, I want to count the ballpark as open space, because it is public.
That's right.
Well, I know one thing that I've learned since I moved to the,
Well, no, it's public. I mean, we're talking about not proximity, we're just talking about it's public or private.
Okay, so, okay, I'm gonna be a little bit of a tough facilitator right now. We've gone through a bunch of these cards, and when you really look at them, the majority are dealing with how we count density. So I think that's where this is a fair question. I think what we're gonna do, and I think the reason for the question is someone just wants to know that what they see is what they're gonna get. And so Katie in the plan is going to define how we count density. We can beat it up again at another meeting. But that way, we'll all be talking about the same kinds of things. There's one other set of kinds of questions that we have. There's one set of questions on agriculture, which is, one question is, do we even need the agricultural category, given that could it be just a special section on the Luke Air Force overlay? And then another question is, what harm does a 5 to 10 acre parcel do in an agriculture area, like a community farm? So I guess the first thing I'd ask is, are we okay with maybe looking at this, changing this 40 acres to allow community farms or things like that in the ag area? Do we have any problems with that?
Changing it to what?
Allowing a 5 or a 10 acre parcel in the agricultural area.
Currently, it requires a 40 acre parcel minimum. So the question is, should we strike that?
I think the 40 acres came more in relation to livestock.
Grazing. But that would be covered by zoning anyway, right? It couldn't be zoned for livestock grazing under 40 acres because of a community.
Well, I think the idea is that if you have livestock, it's better to have a larger area.
What if you have one chicken? Well, I mean, it's a real thing, it's a real thing.
One thing is, again, 5 to 10 acres, and we're not discussing this yet, we'll discuss it at some point, but right now, 20 acres is what it takes to create a need for a general plan amendment. So anything under 20 acres really isn't shown on the general plan. So, kinda how we do it now, 5 to 10 acre piece of anything would need to be shown on the general plan because it's such a small parcel. So the general plan does not exclude family farms from going in certain areas.
I mean, part of it where you could put some of this stuff, like basically neighborhood gardens, stuff like that, it really is almost like it's a subcategory under open space too, because right now it's either passive or active, and, those things aren't really given credit for. So if someone wanted to do a little neighborhood garden of 5 acres, I mean, that should be, or some acreage, or, whatever.
Should be anywhere.
Right.
Okay, so then let's go to the bigger question. Do we want to keep the agricultural category?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that answers that one. That was easy. Okay.
But the 40 acres, you
They're
might
gonna
want to
question,
change.
Someone just had a question, is multifamily considered apartment? I'm sorry, what?
Oh, George was asking a question.
But what about changing the size, the 40 acres, changing
We're
that?
gonna look, that's
Yeah,
what
they're
we're
gonna look at
looking.
that.
We're gonna look at that. Okay.
Okay, someone had a question, is multifamily considered apartments? I'm gonna just generically say yes. Okay? It's not, it's apartments. And so when we talk about apartments, we're talking about probably more than one level.
But you wanna define the density, that's typically 18 and up, correct?
Right.
About 18 units to the acre and up
And
are
over.
apartments.
We actually don't have an
Well,
apartment complex in Goodyear that's over 18 dwelling units.
Most of
Yeah,
it.
no,
So
it's
you-
14.
actually, I mean, you could
14.
have lower density. Yeah, right, so I don't,
Okay.
There's another comment about lot coverage and impervious surfaces. I'm gonna put that into the how we define density category. There's a couple comments on specific policies. One of them being 15 and 18 conflict. We're going to work on that and look at the wording. And then another question was why policy 13? Why are we even having a baseline density?
We're gonna talk more, our next month's meeting is neighborhoods and housing, we'll have the reading. When we talk about neighborhoods and housing, we're gonna get into more depth about design, I think kind of what Mark was getting at, like how far apart are these houses and how important is that? And I think that'll give us some tools to talk about the baseline density, we'll also talk about design, the quality of our neighborhoods, and so we'll be able to have a better discussion of, are there some tools that we want to use to try and encourage what we want to see our neighborhoods look like? And so I think we'll kind of push that. Go ahead, policy 13 off.
I don't know how, I do not know how everyone feels, but, so I may just be singling myself out. I read this document and I did my homework, and quite honestly, a lot of this information was above my understanding, and I read it a couple of times. If I may request that when we table this topic, that you present this in a more simplistic form versus dwelling this and that, just because the way I look at it is that if I'm gonna, I've been pretty quiet just because I don't know how much to add value to this conversation. But I also see it from a consumer standpoint or residential. Unless I'm a developer, I don't go to say, well, I would like to buy this house because it has this dwelling. I just look at the model, and if I like it, and if I want to put a garden, or I have a backyard, or I have family, that's what I look for. So for me, it's just becoming a little bit overwhelming.
That's a great comment, and I think I'm going to ask, we will do that. I'm going to ask you to help. And part of that is sometimes we don't know what because you're all from such varied backgrounds and experiences, we don't know what everybody knows and understands. So if, as you're reading through this material, you would shoot an email to Katie. Okay. We will define terms and talk about stuff at the beginning of each meeting, clarify it. And I know we keep on adding things in. I don't know that we can get around it any other way. We may be able to send out an email glossary before the meeting. I don't know what Katie's workload is, so I don't want to promise that. But I get what you're saying, and I think it's a really good point.
And I don't mean to put more things on Katie, and I don't think that we need to get a glossary or a legend or anything to that aspect, but I'm sure we have a lot of subject matter experts here. So I would just do like an introduction. Okay, we're about to talk about this. This is dwelling, this is this. This is what it means. This is what the goal is. So that I have, kind of like if you do like a minor abstract of what we're going to talk about, right? So it's kind of like when you want to buy a book. You don't read the whole book and then decide to buy it. You can at least, okay, I'm interested or not. That's all.
Okay. We've got a couple comments on putting the noise contours on the map, so we'll address that, and that's sort of just okay. And then we've got one comment asking about zero lot line development. I think that fits into the density discussion. Can we accommodate? How does that work? So we're going to put that into that. How do we figure out densities and where does that fit? And then the last one is how are we going to deal with grazing in scenic neighborhoods? Are we going to comply with leasing or fencing laws? I think that's really more a zoning question and sort of a what's allowed. But we will address zoning and grazing in those neighborhoods through policy, and you can deal with that, okay? So before we leave just the places discussion, okay, we're going to talk about the map. We've got we're not done.
We're not done with voicing.
Businesses. Sorry, we're gonna just go. So the next category is business. And this is kind of a commercial and lighter industrial category. And I've already gotten some comments from some people that maybe I didn't emphasize enough the idea that light industrial is allowed. And what I mean by light industrial is Macy's, Amazon, distribution centers, warehousing, McLean, McDowell, those kind of large scale, they're basically, they don't have odors or fumes or noise. They're less obnoxious. So policy 23 Litchfield Road between Van Buren Street and Yuma. The area to the east is all residential. The area to the west is kind of designated as this business category. And so that area that's kind of along Litchfield Road, to me, that's kind of an area where, maybe some apartments would make sense there, maybe some more commercial type uses or mixed uses would make sense to buffer the residential from the, possibly industrial uses. That might be one way of creating a tool. There might also be some cool business developments where someone wants to build some workforce housing with the new business park, and they might be able to design it in a really cool way, and we want to allow developers that opportunity to do it. So any clarifying questions on business? Yes.
It's actually not clarifying, but it's a thought. We keep talking about that bullet area and what we have a vision of maybe what we'd like to see down there, and I'm thinking about, mixed use. If say we do have some office, some high office space there, high rent office space. When I think about business, the thing that worries me is that we create these empowerment areas, and at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, everything shuts down and nothing gets used. And so then you create this vacuum of, it's a great place for kids to go in there and get into trouble. And even if you had a theater, a movie theater, you had apartment buildings for people that maybe are here for 6 months and they're working here in a project, some places to eat. Those are the kinds of things that, that I would like to see in those areas. And that's my idea of mixed use.
And you're right, that's exactly what that is.
Right.
So moving on to industrial, the biggest difference between the business category and the industrial category is it would allow heavier industrial uses as well as it allows business. So this is, and you can see from the pictures, the airport, landfills. It doesn't mean that's what's gonna go all over in these areas, it's just, these are areas where that might be appropriate. And so it's allowing areas for this and also protecting the rest of the business use from these higher intensity uses. So the policies on that, and if you got a new copy, you're out of pages, sorry.
It shouldn't be on that.
They're actually all carryover policies, and it's basically the same as the business. These areas, the buffer from the airport space, we want to buffer residential uses from potentially obnoxious uses and using it as a tool.
Does that include the cement places, manufacturer places next to the rivers and things like that? Or would that be in the mining?
That's mining, and you might have seen in there, we're gonna have an overlay for aggregate mining. It's a brand new, requirement, and it's challenging to get a hold of the people I need to get a hold of. So that's kind of on hold until I get all the information, but there's actually gonna be an overlay that deals with aggregate mining in the riverbed on some.
Can we get something that might want to buffer the sort of heavy industrial from sort of the office park industrial sort of style?
Repeat that for me so I can get it written down.
Buffering the sort of the heavy industrial from sort of the office park industrial?
Got it written down, okay.
All right, so then finally, the city center category, and, so there's just two policies. One is a carryover, and the final one is just basically throwing it onto the specific area plan. But that specific area plan handles all the policies, and there pretty much won't be anything else about the city center in the land use plan.
Is there any questions, clarification?
What, just, Katie, the airport, again, you are going to break it out of the industrial as a separate, special category?
Yes.
Okay.
No, that wasn't.
No?
No, that's industrial.
The airport's not enough. Oh, you're doing Goodyear. Yeah,
Not-
the Goodyear
not the
airport.
Goodyear.
The plan was not to have the Phoenix Goodyear Airport as a separate category, because there's no, I don't know if there, I mean, you can explain to me, I wasn't seeing the need to create an entire new category for one parcel. That, I don't know, what
Well, I was thinking it would be under a special category because on its own, it may become the next Sky Harbor.
No.
No.
That's never gonna happen.
I think
Never
that's-
allow.
I
It's
told
a
you
good
what,
dream,
We're
huh?
gonna try and have, the airport, Joe Husband from the Phoenix Junior Airport stop by to the committee a while back, one of our first meetings. I want him here on our Economic Development Day, and I think that's a good discussion to kind of table to that Economic Development Day.
It will-
Create an overlay and create an zone and define how it is, how we deal with the airport.
So it is going to be under industrial in the meantime.
Right now, it's under industrial.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, I've got one card that's kind of a discussion topic, which would be what about commercial, having commercial uses in the industrial area? So, for example, department store or a strip center, any of those things, does anybody have any concerns if that were included in the industrial area? Anybody see any problem with that?
No, and I think that's more of a zoning, planning and zoning
One thing I'm gonna be
issue.
creating that I didn't get to yet is typically in the zoning book, but it's a land use and zoning correlation. And we write down all the zoning districts that are allowed in each land use category. So I will be giving that to you so you can see that and comment on it.
Oh, sorry, go
Well, I
ahead.
think what you just said probably answers my question, but from a general plan perspective, not from a zoning perspective, is it at all safe to say that lesser uses are always allowed than a given category?
In the past, that's not the way we've done our zoning ordinance or our general plan.
Yeah, and I don't think state statute does. Zoning has to be in.
I said, forget zoning. For a general plan,
The general plan.
For the
What it
general plan,
says,
no, it's exclusive. It does, unless we say it's allowed,
Okay.
it's not allowed. So we have to say commercial is okay.
however, if you have existing zoning, it does not have to be in conformance with the general plan category. I just want to make that clear. But if you're going to zone to something, yes, you need to be in conformance. Okay.
Then I was gonna pass.
Isn't it more like an ancillary use instead of a primary use? Because if you're developing a master plan, and if you put it, maybe you say, like in the building code, you can have different uses in there and consider it an ancillary use if you're under a certain percentage. So,
I think the issue would be, could you do a 300-acre farm? Could you go ahead and down zone, which I can't imagine happening, right, to R40 in the neighborhoods category, right? That actually could potentially be out of conformance with the plans.
well, I was thinking more of, like she was mentioning about an industrial zone use, where everybody goes home at 5 o'clock. And so it doesn't make sense to put in a large commercial shopping center there because nobody's there.
Right, unless that commercial shopping center had a movie theater. And that movie theater had.
Yeah, but then it wouldn't be,
restaurant stuff that
it
came
wouldn't,
around it.
I don't know. I wouldn't think so as a.
Typically, what
Look into
commercial
one in
is
Scottsdale.
commercial support.
Right, I mean, that's-
Hotel for
The old
business
system in Scottsdale is
Right.
exactly like that.
for lunch.
So,
That's-
like, but it still wouldn't be a major use, it'd be an ancillary use.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd be under 10 acres.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move to the map, and before we do that, the question that I tried to ask before, but I jumped the gun, is, are the types of places that we've talked about, I know we have some still questions about some of the specifics of them, does that cover the range of types of places we should have in Goodyear? Scenic neighborhoods, open space, agriculture, which we're keeping, commercial, and industrial.
And I just passed this out, what I tried to do is go through each of the categories, and then go through each of those things from the vision, and try, is everything from the vision being addressed somewhere in a category? Are the categories addressing different areas of vision? On the back is doing the same thing for the map, so that was my tool, and the way I put it is, do these categories give us all the tools we need in the toolbox? Do the policies give us all the tools we need in our toolbox to create the vision that you have?
Create the kind of city that you want. already given us ideas about the kinds of parks that are going these different places. As we move forward, we'll be discussing in more detail the kinds of other kinds of infrastructure we want, the kinds of public buildings in these places. But overall, do these kinds of places cover for the kind of city we want? Are we missing anything? This is a really important step forward, because then we're going to sit with these categories. We're not going to add to them. We may change within them, but we're not going to add another category. So are we good?
Policies are still gonna change a lot.
Right, categories. So we're okay with the framework, the tree. We're going to work on the ordinance.
The overlay, we're not gonna touch right
We're not an
We're not
overlay.
discussing
We're not an overlay.
Okay.
Okay. So we're good?
I might would suggest that we should have business/commercial, because there could be a light commercial, I can't think of one off the top of my head that may not be listed as a business entity.
Okay, so we want to do a business/commercial category.
That's different than,
Because there could also be commercial and industrial as well, if it was.
So you're saying that,
Just titling it differently or creating a brand new category?
No, I'm just thinking titling it different. Let's just make it business/commercial, and all that falls under that.
you know what I would ask, if anybody has heartburns over any of the titles, send us an email and we can work on that. Because I think those are important too.
That would be
So if
heavy.
you want to get some
Yeah,
better
but
names for these categories, go for it.
tell you,
But
you
right now, we're good with our, it's actually seven.
it just falls under industrial.
It's seven. So we're good with our 7 categories. Okay? Okay, so now we're gonna move to the next part of the meeting. The next part of the meeting is Katie's gonna kind of talk us through how she landed these places now we have up in the air on the ground. Okay, so how she took these different kinds of ideas for places and put them in the city and kind of built the city with them. Does that make sense? Okay?
So again, there's mistakes in this map, and I noticed them already. And so if anyone has, again, we want to keep the discussion high, if people have comments on specific parcels, specific areas that you think might not be correct, that might be a good email, write it on your map and give it to me kind of thing.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, we're coming back, remember, we are coming back to the map. So this is the first of a minimum of 3, I think, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 or more times we'll be visiting this map. So again, if we're gonna talk about, we need a little commercial on this corner, or, this little industrial area needs to extend out that, right now, let's, take a breath on that, and just kind of say, generally, this placement looks okay. These broad areas, this philosophy of how you apply these places works. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to be kind of quick. So when we look at the land use map, Tom and I were taking a look at it, and we had a thought.
that's the old one.
That actually, there's almost 2 areas to our land use plan.
Yeah, you looked at this.
So we're going to look at it this way. There's the north area, which is the area that's currently developing and is likely going to develop over the next 10 years. And then there's kind of the south area, and I used Pecos Road, which is, right here, just north of Pecos Road is the Campamilla development in Estrella, which is kind of the southernmost development in Estrella. And the other southern area, we're guessing that we're not going to likely see development in that area over the next 10 years. Stranger things have happened, but we probably will see planning going on in that area. So looking at the north area, this is just something I did to look, just trying to figure out what's going on in this area. So there's 97 square miles out of 247 square miles that are just in this north part, north of Pecos Road. 45 square miles of this area is developed, so 46% of the area is developed. Then we can add in subdivisions, and you can see the gray areas pop up. There's additional areas that are subdivided, meaning they actually have a plat or a site plan for those. That's kind of a level beyond zoning. And then finally, there's a whole bunch of area that's zoned. And so the gray, black areas are areas that developed or areas that are zoned, which we keep calling entitled. And you can see those color bits, there's not a lot of color bits left. And just by, again, a side note, you can see a lot of them are along the river, some of them are along I-10, and remember when we had that discussion about the land use plan, we talked about different themes, how we deal with high density, how we deal with city, our build out according to MAG is 760,000, and our planning area is currently 73,000 who are living in the planning area. So we're only 9.6% built out in terms of population growth. In the north part, there's those 73,000 residents pretty much live north of Pecos Road, and the build out for north of Pecos Road is 147,000. So we have about half the residents north of Pecos Road that we're going to have, according to MAG. And MAG's coming out with projections, and right now they're saying about 30,000 residents we're going to add to this area before 2020. So that's the kind of growth we're talking about. It's not even crazy high growth.
Which is about 10,000 housing.
Yeah, 10,000 housing units. And they're saying about a third north of I-10, about a third between I-10 and the river, and about a third in the Estrella area. So those are the trends we're going to see. So again, I think we're going to go through the whole map first, but the question is, how do we deal with each of those? If you look at the handout and see, I kind of tried to write out how I'm dealing with each of those areas.
I just want to give you guys a step back and think about some of these numbers. 30,000 people at about 3 people per household, which is pretty much about, a little maybe low of what the valley is. So that's 3,000 housing units. If you just think about it, just giving you ways to play with the mental image, okay? 10,000 housing units, thank you. 10,000 housing units. Figure at 3 units to the acre, right? You divide 3 into 10,000, that's basically 330,000 acres. You divide that by 640, about 5 square miles? 5.6, yeah. It's about 5 square miles of development. You just built that out. With open spaces, the way we're building now, it's about 5 square miles overall are going to be developed over the next 10 years.
No, this is to 20.
Over the next
7 years.
7 to 8 years.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's a
Will
lot.
not happen.
Yeah,
So
I don't think it's
just
good.
to show, again, to play with those numbers, I told you,
I'm with them.
7 years.
Don't give them a
okay,
hate.
in terms of population growth, we're about 9.6% built out. In terms of land development in the whole area, we're about 20% built out. The reason why we're so much more built out in terms of land growth is because we built so many more single-family homes. And that's how I know we're gonna be seeing a lot more apartments in the future because the land has been out. So those are the issues we're gonna have to deal with. So let's look at the south area. So in the south area, there's 150 square miles south of Pecos Road. Only 6 square miles are developed.
Wow.
So only 4% of the land south of Pecos Road is developed, and most of that is the landfill and the grounds air share. And then there are a few areas that are subdivided, and then there is quite a bit of zoning. But even when you add that in, only 27% of the land south of Pecos Road is zoned. And what this doesn't account for is that, the area that's way south of Amaranth in the Sonoran Valley area, and also another, Estrella, what we were calling Estrella Region 3, which is kind of the area in the north, that's what we call the water zone. They kind of have an extra step to their zoning process to finalize that zoning. And so you can see why we were splitting the city up in 2 areas, because they're just 2 different areas with different trends. So what I see, I don't foresee a lot of growth happening in this area by 2025, but I think we're gonna see a lot of rezonings coming in with these master plan communities, again, maybe responding to market changes. We're gonna see new areas zoned for master plan communities. I think one of the challenges for us is gonna be infrastructure planning in this area. And so that's what we're gonna be dealing with. And again, this kind of deals with how we related the vision.
Did that, the calculation I think you pulled from MAG, did that account for all the open space that's shown here in the south portion of the land use map? The 700,000 population build out?
Yeah, the 30,000 people that.
If it was on the whole general plan, I think it's
760,000 people.
The 700, yeah, when you plugged in, because you
It's based
projected,
on the land use.
it's just based off the land use plan, okay.
Well, and current developed. They look at current developed, current zonings, entitlements, what's platted, kind of subtract that, and then the other areas, they use the land use plan to decide how many.
For those of you who don't know what MAG is the Maricopa Association of Governments, and it's the regional planning agency for the Maricopa County area. The way it does, it's kind of charged with doing the population projections. It gets a number from the state divides up the population among the counties, it hands the Maricopa County number to MAG, and MAG says, now you figure it out. MAG looks at everybody's general plan, based on the density of the general plan, it develops projections. If you change your general plan, your projections are gonna change too.
So that's kind of the presentation on the land use. I'll put the big land use map up. So that's what, again, I'm trying to stay at this high level now, knowing what we know, what we think the trends are gonna be over the next 10 years. In general, do you think this land use map is setting us up with the tools we need to deal with the issues we're gonna face over the next 10 years? Okay, yeah, so that's a great idea. I'll broadly talk through you with the map. And so the area north of I-10, for one, a lot of that area I designated the land use based on what the zoning is. Because what I've heard from this committee and from the public is we like Goodyear. Goodyear's developed quite nicely. There's very few areas that we think have not developed the way we want to see it. So what's existing and what's planned in those master communities, the area north of I-10 and north of Pecos Road pretty much reflects that. You can see that area very north is responding to the Luke Air Force Base noise contours, and the rectangle is the actual accident potential zone. And so there's a lot of restrictions on what type of land uses you can use up there. We also have the 303 corridor up there. It is prime for business development. And then we have all the residential developments up there. You can kind of see the mall sites sticking out, the commercial areas along I-10. But you probably know by traveling in these areas, there's also a lot of commercial developments on some of these arterials that aren't shown in a different color because they fit in many of those categories. So we're trying to use that existing development as examples as this is allowed, this is consistent with the general plan. And then the big purple area is, that's in the center is the airport. And then it's also being taken along NC-95 and the corridor, the 30, that may be going through that area that it's also responding to. And then you can also see the commercial along the Fuller corridor between Litchfield Road and Fuller Avenue. Again, we see that as business office development, but it's that business category, so they have a lot of flexibility. And then south of the river, again, we're mostly responding to Newland's plan. You can see that because of the topography change, you see that scenic neighborhoods category all of a sudden pop up because of that area, agricultural areas that we want to preserve and use those scenic neighborhoods. So, does anyone have questions on the land use plan?
Katie, I have just a quick, what's that?
There's a little dog here out there. There are, and I don't know the full history, there was an annexation and a de-annexation, and I think it stayed in our planning area. Is that, you know?
It was land we got from the BLM that was supposed to be for recreation purposes that we annexed.
But in that area, there's some, if you've ever been kind of on the drive to PIR, the Phoenix International Raceway, there's some large lot development kind of out there.
That is weird, isn't it?
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
To what extent in the area, certainly south of Pecos and even perhaps looking south of Patterson, are not almost all of the road alignments there estimated or projected, but nowhere near definitive?
There has actually been, in the south, a lot of roadway planning, again, by MAG, the Maricopa Association of Governments. There was the Hacienda plan and the Hidden Valley plan, and their primary purposes were to do some planning on some of the interstates, but they did show some of the arterial roadways in those plans. And so this actually is consistent with the MAG regional plan. Now, certainly, the smaller the roadway, the more likely it is to change and adjust. Which roads we're showing as being future river crossings over the Waterman Wash, which the Waterman Wash is that green space that diagonally cuts through the southern part of the city. you know, maybe that'll change. We're updating the transportation plan right now, so we might get some answers from the transportation plan. But for the most part, there is a lot set in that plan.
And I was just asking to the point of the 303 alignment and the Rainbow Road alignment, are those sufficiently likely to be what they are, to be placing land use areas next to them, or are they going to move? Well, that's why I'm asking.
Because, you know, we hear that there's a roadway gonna be going in, but, you know, ADOT only does a certain level of study, and they have not decided what the corridor is, even south of I-10 really. But by us showing where we prefer the corridor to be, and then we can start preserving right-of-way in those areas and planning for it, it then becomes the best alternative when ADOT starts doing their environmental studies. So we want to put those roadways where the city thinks they would best serve the city.
Do we run any risk of, if those roadway alignments change significantly, of then inhibiting something that is no longer where we want it to be? In other words, or do you just do a general plan amendment if that craps up?
Well, I mean, if the roadway were to significantly change from what we're showing it, it would likely create a need for a general plan
Okay.
amendment. The city would probably propose that. The 303 is a unique case because it goes entirely within the city of Goodyear. So we do have a lot of control over that future. It's different than the issues we're seeing with like the 202 and Alatuski and the fights that are going on. Because this corridor is completely in our city, we do have a lot of leverage on, do we want it over here
Okay.
or over here, because we're not fighting with anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right there.
I think what I hear you say is, even though you're breaking it up into north and south, we should consider it as a whole,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, we're definitely considering it as a whole. I mean,
Yeah.
again, connectivity.
Yeah.
We also, you know, although we don't foresee development happening in that area south of Pecos, we're not necessarily limiting it, restricting it either. We want to make sure the tools are in place.
Yeah.
So if something happens and that area starts to develop, it's ready. So the planning is going on.
I know we didn't talk about overlays tonight, but I was just curious about the village centers. How were they determined? Are they zoned village centers? I mean, why were they chosen to be in those particular places? I understand what they mean, but.
Well, most of them are shown on the general plan currently.
Okay.
And that is one that we need to discuss.
Okay.
We do.
Yeah,
I need direction on how far to go with them and where they should be. So,
Is that it?
Leslie's finding out if we have comments.
I'm just, yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask.
You're doing good.
Well, that's my, I mean, who else has comments or questions? And basically, I guess to give you an update of where we go from here. You know, I'm gonna take your comments, and I've already been meeting with a lot of the property owners and, in the area, and I'm gonna go and keep meeting with them. And I'm kind of working with a lot of the property owners on the pink side. Is this parcel pink, or is it purple? Do I agree with your assessment of that? And so, I would like, you know, again, if you have comments on a specific kind of parcel or area and what color it should be, go ahead and email me that, because I'll be looking at those and working with it. As we go through each of the topics, we're probably gonna be revisiting the plan. Like I said, next month we're talking about neighborhoods and housing, it might cause changes to the plan. Month after that, we're talking about economic development, we're gonna talk about overlays, it'll cause changes to the plan. If we talk about each of these topics, it's gonna probably make us think, oh yeah, we need to change the plan based on that. But our next meeting, I think, is in October, where an entire meeting is devoted to the land use plan. So I hope at that time to bring you the whole chapter, you know, basically a much more, you know, this is kind of the recommended land use plan and land use policies based on your discussion, what I'm hearing from the outside. But we're gonna be talking about it the whole time, but it's gonna be a focus in October. Then you'll see it again when we see the whole general plan, and we'll be talking about it again then. So does that make sense to everyone? Is sound like an okay plan?
Okay, what I was doing back there was just making sure we've got some folks that are landowners in the audience and that are involved in development. And I just wanted to make sure that they didn't have anything that they felt they really needed to say. I'm gonna speak for you. They were, at this point, they said no, they're reserving their right to speak later, but at this point, they don't have anything to say. There were a couple of generic comments that did come up that I want to share. One person asked about how these kinds of very broad land uses go to calculate infrastructure, which I think is something you're worried about. What I would tell you is a typical way that this has been done in other communities that do it is these land use places are reflections of existing development. And so typically what you do is you look at the existing development pattern and you project that out in the terms of the percentages. And that's how you come up with density and sewer projections and water projections and traffic projections. It's always an art because very frankly, if someone rezones 640 acres, your projections have to shift anyway, and that could happen at any time at any general plan amendment. So, but overall, that's more or less the process. The other kind of generic comment that came out, I'm just going to hand it to Kate, she can work on it, is maybe there needs to be a little bit of a look at a separate open space, an open space category separate from recreation, because some of the real valuable resources, such as the Rio, well, I call it the Rio Este, but because of the Gila River, because of maybe the Waterman Wash, which is somewhat out there still. So Katie's going to give a little thought to that also as she moves forward. So we may end up having 8 and not 7 categories. But those are generally sort of the audience comments at this point. Are there any other comments? So I know Katie said this, but I'm going to say it again, because someone once told me you have to hear something 3 times to remember it. When you go home, read through the policies again, and make sure that as you read through them, it's described the kind of place that I have in my head when I think about a neighborhood, I think about a scenic neighborhood, and I think about a commercial area. What are some of your worries or your concerns about what could happen in these places? You don't need to come up with the answer. All you have to do is ask the question. Here's the brain surgeon. She'll figure out the answer, okay? I'm really serious. If you're that the 24-hour environment was a great question. How do these areas work on more than 24-hour areas? Those are the kinds of great kinds of questions that Katie will say, you're right, I missed a whole set of policies on that. Let me take that out. As you go through the land use map, remember that in the top half of that map, and the dividing line we pick is very arbitrary. It'll shift, it'll move, and it's really for not as a line in the plan, but it's just a line to give you a framework for how Katie made decisions about land use. We're not saying no development can occur in South Goodyear, that's not in the plan, it's just a framework discussion point. As you look through that plan, think about, the issues that we talked about for the top half. Are we addressing those issues properly with land use? And the topics we talked about for the bottom half, are we addressing those issues properly with land use? And if you see little changes you think need to be made, write them on those maps, circle them, and give them to Katie. That's the best way for her to keep track and report. So until then, next week we're back to Idea Champ. Next month, we're back to Idea Champions. And the Idea Champions for the And so the Idea Champions for next month are.
We have a lot because I asked the Idea Champions that are supposed to be tonight to go next week since we have so much to talk about.
So we're going to give a little more. So we're going to give a little more time to Idea Champions next month because we had to shift some things around. Please review your neighborhood and housing reading materials. We'll be talking about our general plan philosophy for that area. What I might tell you is now we're moving away from the map, from these sections. We're really talking about our ideal, how we expect these places to behave. So we're more back into policy, which is, the idea is not what it's going to look like, but what we want to do. Okay, what's the framework we want to give the city to guide its decisions? What's its decision-making framework? With that, any comments from the audience? I have to thank all of you for hanging in. This was brutal. Thank you.
Well, one thing I think we all realize is how in-depth the land use part of this is. So make sure you do your reading at home. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed tonight or that's in the rest of the paperwork we're going to be discussing in the future, write them down so that we can get explanations. We want everybody understanding what they're talking about. Okay?
Also, if anyone feels that I'm not giving them adequate time to talk or they're not getting time to talk, just drop drop Katie an email or drop me an email, and I'll change how we facilitate. Go back to rename, go figure something out. But my goal is to get everybody, providing the forum so that all of you can express your ideas. And if I'm not doing a good job on that, you need to tell me so I can do a better job. So I thank you in advance for that.
Okay, if there's no further business, meeting is adjourned.